Good afternoon. I've got to the afternoon now, but it's been a very enjoyable morning. And as Katie was just saying, the link between the previous discussion and the one we're about to have is very strong, because we can now combine connectivity, automated vehicles with AI, and the question of trust comes very much forward. So what's my involvement? So as has been said, I'm a partner at Pinsent Masons. I've been looking at the whole area of connectivity and automation for many years now. And over the last probably 5-6 years, we've brought AI to that in all sectors. And of course, we saw the explosion last year as the large language models came into play. And the real value of that, we immediately go to the ChatGPT and what it will produce. But the huge value is the ability to interact, to actually speak to the tools. And that has brought us many use cases. And those use cases are very much the ones that we can see in automated vehicles. So I'm going to call up the panel now to explore some of those questions around trust. And whilst they're joining me on the stage, we've got a few videos to introduce them. Thank you.
There's a huge opportunity for the logistics sector to embrace connected and autonomous vehicles. We can increase safety and reduce accidents, reduce vehicle downtime, use less fuel and reduce emissions, increase productivity by not having to adhere to restrictive rules on driver's hours, and enjoy reduced road congestion. But that's the best case scenario business plan, and to get from where we are today will require lots of steps in between.
Autonomous vehicles could be the silver bullet for blind and partially sighted people and provide a level of freedom previously only ever dreamed of.
They would enable independent mobility for those unable to use a traditional vehicle. That could be the elderly, those who are unable to drive in a rural location, or Motability operations customers.
Welcome. I'm very much looking forward to the conversation. I think the issues of trust and mobility for all are very much part of what we're going to be talking about. So I'm going to start with Sarah and looking at the fundamental question of why do we need AI in automated vehicles? What value can it bring? And also, how do we harness the trust of individuals in doing that?
Thank you for having me. So Sarah Gates, I'm Director of Public Policy at Wayve, and coming from Wayve, which is a company that's been pioneering the use of AI, specifically end-to-end AI, since 2017. We clearly believe that AI is integral to creating self-driving vehicles that can actually operate, with a viable business model in many different locations, and most importantly, it's the only way to achieve safety in self-driving. So one of the big challenges that the industry has had is basically being able to deal with this, what we call the long tail of scenarios. So that is scenarios which are kind of very low, have a low distribution, are edge cases, which you do not experience in your day-to-day driving. But in order to have a system that we can trust, that the public can trust, you need to be able to deal with those scenarios, those very rare occurrences. And often, things that we might hear about in the news and kind of look at, rightly with a lot of scrutiny and kind of maybe something's gone wrong, often they fall in that bucket of something that a human couldn't predict. So the huge potential of artificial intelligence and basing systems increasingly on artificial intelligence is the ability to generalize and make decisions much more like humans. So you've seen something before, you see something similar, you can use that intelligence that you've built up through hours, days, months, years of your life driving, and be able to essentially use lateral thinking to think, what would I do in this situation? That is the huge power of artificial intelligence. It brings us to a new possibility with self-driving vehicles that we couldn't achieve with modular robotics. So modular robotics typically relies on hand coding lots of rules that rely on human concepts. In order for us to be able to hand code all of those rules, we have to have seen all of the scenarios, and that's where that becomes very brittle. So when we think about trust in AI, actually we shouldn't really trust systems that don't use AI, because AI will be how we achieve safety. Now, of course, it's not as simple as that. We have to bring people along with us. We have to be able to assure the safety of that AI, and that is actually an active area of kind of interest for us. So we're not only building the AI that we think is integral to deliver on these systems, but we are using a holistic approach to looking at how we assure that AI. And importantly, not just assure it for ourselves, assure it for our industry partners, government, and then that forms the basis of how we will secure public trust in the technology. So that's looking at things like our Drive Safe AI project, which we are collaborating with the Centre for Connected and Autonomous Vehicles and our partners at Warwick University, where we are actively looking at novel kind of methodologies to demonstrate the safety of AI that we can clearly communicate to regulators, because currently we don't have an agreed approach globally for how we look at the safety of artificial intelligence within automotive systems. So we really want to take the lead there and being able to do that. But we also have other aspects to our technology. For example, we launched Lingo last year, which is a natural language interface that you can have with our system. So you can actually ask our system what it's paying attention to. So importantly, not one of these things is the answer to building trust in AI, but when you take lots of efforts together and into a holistic approach, and you think about how to communicate that, you end up with a very strong case.
And taking that a stage further, to gain that trust, but also the regulators with the EU AI Act yesterday being adopted by Parliament, it's got to go on to the next stage, but we're very much seeing the whole issue of ethics, trustworthiness, responsible AI coming forward. And one of those key issues is transparency. Do you think we can get to a point where you can explain how the AI is making the decisions? Because I think that will be something that really goes to trust.
Yeah, again, I think there won't necessarily be one tool that makes your AI explainable. You're going to have to take a lot of different routes. So whether that be something like Lingo, which is showing you what the model is paying attention to, and it can actually tell you in natural language. But equally for engineers in the room, they'll know that's not enough to make your AI explainable. So then you'll look at also how trustworthy your whole system is. It's not just about the model itself. So you'll have different ways of testing that AI, making sure that you have assured the training data, the testing data, that you have an argument to the regulator on how you've chosen that, how it aligns with your operational design domain. Equally, how another really important aspect is how you're going to work with the regulator when there is potentially an incident or a collision. So active area, obviously in regulation in the UK and globally now, is looking at, well, what data do you record? How do we know when the system's engaged? And, what metrics do we want on the safety performance, which you're recording as manufacturers or developers, which you then have to share with insurers and the regulators. So there's a lot of different layers to it. And I think when we talk about making AI explainable, we're not actually saying who's it explainable to, because there's very different answers depending on who you're asking. So I kind of would love if we could talk about it in a more holistic way when we talk about explainable AI.
So lots of different stakeholders. And then I guess moving on to stakeholders, moving on to the whole issue of trust in users in different guises, as well as regulation. We won't get the users unless the users see the opportunity and that they can trust that. So moving to Kevin, looking at the business perspective in logistics, What do you see as being the needs to for the business to embrace the technology?
Well, I think, in terms of context, maybe first, I think logistics and effective supply chains are, and we often don't think about this, but they are critical to UK PLC and keeping trade moving, keeping Britain moving. And nothing works, if you think about it, nothing works without logistics, does it? And it's probably worth thinking about that for a moment, the importance of the commercial sector and logistics. But if nothing moves, you have no manufacturing, you have no trade, you have no retail. So it would be a very bleak and dismal world, perhaps, that we'd be living in. But I think the next government certainly has a great opportunity to drive growth across the whole economy by making supply chains more efficient and more effective. And certainly one way of doing that is by looking at connected and autonomous vehicles across the commercial vehicle sector. And yes, of course, there's a huge opportunity there, especially around autonomy with larger vehicles. And smaller ones, to be honest. We see a lot of that happening in cities already with robots and drones and different ways of delivering. But specifically talking about how do we move to that next stage with larger vehicles carrying goods and freight around our roads, there's a huge opportunity there. I mean, the most obvious, clearly, with autonomy is for taking the driver out of the cab. That's a clear direct cost that we could take out, and that's a significant part of the cost of distribution to any logistics operators. Certainly for the industry and for wider society, clearly it would be safer with less incidents and accidents. They have downtime. It's not just about the safety of people, but that's clearly of primary importance. But less accidents means less downtime for vehicles, and it means less costly repairs. And obviously the personal side of staff and the public being injured. Safety will happen. I know that's a key element of legislation that's being drafted, but clearly without the improved safety, none of this is going to happen anyway. Autonomous vehicles tend to be driven more efficiently, so they use less fuel, they produce less emissions, and there's a huge opportunity around productivity. Clearly any, you may or may not know this, but any large vehicle moving around has to adhere to lots of different rules and regulations around the hours that the driver is committing as a driver, and the breaks that he needs to take and the rest periods as well. And that's clearly vital for the safety of drivers, staff, and the general public, that the humans driving vehicles are not tired. But clearly autonomy and not having a driver in the cab would be a huge step forward in terms of keeping vehicles moving, reducing downtime, getting more out of the fleets that you've got. That's a huge opportunity, and I think also that probably would mean less vehicles on the road as we're getting more out of the ones that we've got. So reduced congestion, shorter journey times, more predictable journey times. These are all huge benefits. But I guess I've been talking about the best case scenario, and that's the scenario where we get to full autonomy. I think there's quite a lot of challenges before we get there. There's quite a few stages in between where we are today and taking drivers out of the cabs of large vehicles. That's where the bigger problems lie, I think, in terms of the investment and business case. There's an opportunity as well for off-road, and that's starting to happen already with connected and autonomous vehicles within distribution centres and business parks. And I think that's a great way of learning about the technology, the investment, and the business case. So off-road before on-road is probably a good thing. But really for road fleet operators, in the logistics sector, I think the business case only really makes sense when you can take the driver out of the cab, and that's the challenge.
We've heard a lot about opportunity. What do you see as the immediate challenges that are preventing adoption?
Yeah, well, certainly the biggest. Maybe I've not thought about them as the most immediate, but certainly the biggest. I think we've been talking about autonomy and connected and autonomous vehicles for many years in the commercial vehicle sector. If I'm being honest, that seems to have been dialed down a little bit over the last couple of years. I'm not seeing that level of focus within commercial vehicle sector. And I think there's a good reason for that. I think there's a lot of distraction happening. There's the whole agenda around decarbonisation And I think that's taking up a huge amount of headspace and investment space within fleet operators. You know, they've got some big decisions to make about what they're going to finance and where they're going to spend money, what fuels they're going to use, what vehicles they need to achieve targets that are looming around emissions. So I think that's stolen headspace and investment space. So I think that distraction is a big issue, and that's not likely to go away anytime soon. I think clearly public perception, and I think we're going to talk about that more widely, but I've heard the last couple of days actually, and today, the example of the general public getting used to autonomous technology, and we point to flights and say that, you know, the autopilot on a flight, most of it is automatic. So that means people are getting used to it. I'm not sure that's the case, actually. I think, well, maybe a quick show of hands, but if you got on an aeroplane that didn't have a pilot, would you feel safe if you put your hand up? See, I think we've got a long way to go with that one. So, and that's what we're talking about. We're talking really the business case, certainly for commercial vehicles, is taking the driver out of the vehicle, not sort of being there on standby and doing the more difficult bits. So I think public perception is a huge barrier and a huge challenge. And the business case, which I mentioned, which is, I think it only makes sense for the commercial sector when you get the driver out of the cab. All of the steps along that road to get to that point require additional investment, and the driver is still in the cab, and that's really hard to justify in an industry that has very low margins and many other priorities for capital at the moment. So, and of course, there's always the legislative environment and the infrastructure, but I think we'll overcome those. It's more the practical challenges, I think, that we need to overcome. But a massive prize. We will get there, but some big barriers.
You can see that some of the issues around the environment will also then come into that whole equation with many positives from that automation.
Yes, I think that's the case, but the more immediate challenge is around the investment choices that are being made now around fuels and technologies and vehicles and you know, very expensive connections to the grid, and there's a lot of challenge around that journey to no emissions and low emissions, and lots of debate and changes in legislation that need to happen.
Thank you. Really interesting. Moving then to sort of the broader opportunities around use cases. So looking at the whole issue of the potential to make people more mobile, which we've heard that mentioned already, and the opportunities that I think both automated vehicles themselves, but also bringing in AI technologies around that. The combination is what is really powerful. So coming first to Rob, what do you think is the potential for mobility generally, and what are the challenges around that? So the opportunities and the challenges.
So I think, I mean, I kind of agree. I think sort of autonomy does feel like it's still sort of on the horizon at the moment, but connectivity is sort of here today, and a lot of our focus right now is on what we can do with the data that kind of comes off of these cars. We have shown through a pilot of 10,000 vehicles that we were able to predict half of all of the mechanical breakdowns within that sort of pilot group and intervene in many cases to prevent that breakdown from happening. And obviously for our customers, that's fantastic news. You know, it means they're not stuck on the side of the road. They continue to be mobile through that experience. And I think we are really only just scratching the surface of what it's possible to do with that data. I feel like as a company, we are here to some extent to kind of address market failures, but also to tailor some of the services that are available more to our own customer base. And using that data gives us loads of opportunity to do that.
And then looking to the vehicles themselves, for your customers, do you think that there's additional opportunities that can be brought forward by the use of AI?
I think, so when we do reach the point where we have fully autonomous vehicles, I think it will offer some benefit to our customers.
I would say you can be a customer on the scheme from the age of 3, and so not everyone who is a customer is a driver. You can already kind of nominate drivers, and so to some extent, I guess the benefits are, perhaps slightly limited, but it would offer more independence to the disabled person if they're not reliant on another driver in order to make the journeys that they want to make. Absolutely.
And Jim, coming to you, the same issues there, the opportunities and challenges.
Yeah, well, I think there's a massive opportunity for blind and partially sighted people. If we focus on specifically autonomous vehicles, which will be the leap, I think, for people with sight loss. At the moment, there's 2 million people who are blind, partially sighted, or sight affected in the UK. And we asked a significant proportion of them, and 2/3 of them felt like they were excluded from travel activities. And that's not just driving, it's actually being able to use our trains, our buses. And so that is, having an autonomous vehicle which you can use, which is fully accessible, which enables you to go where you want, is going to drive a sense of independence, and well-being. And we've found through our research that actually having sight loss is correlated with a lower life expectancy, and activities like being able to get out and about increase life expectancy. They reduce mortality rates. So I think it's really important to a sense of autonomy, a sense of well-being, and a sense of independence for our users. And I think the biggest challenges come around making it work for somebody who has no or low levels of vision. It's interesting to hear Sarah and Renee talk about those extreme use cases. And I think it's also understanding the use cases where we're applying AI. So autonomous buses, for example, sound like a great idea. For blind and partially sighted people, they may make it less accessible, because they will often rely on a driver to stop at the stop and help them on, find them a seat. So when you remove the driver from that situation, you've actually taken a step back if you've, someone who relies on that. So really understanding those needs of blind and partially sighted people. And I mean, I think, I'm obviously here representing RNIB, representing a constituent of 2 million blind and partially sighted people, but this goes for all 16 million people with disabilities across the UK, and wider, in fact. Any kind of extreme use cases, unusual use cases, we need to have those at, I think, the centre of what we're designing. It's clearly a sector, and I'm new to this, so forgive any misspeaks, but it's clearly a sector which is driven by technology, and at the heart of that is a human. Do we sometimes forget about that human? Is it so technology focused sometimes that we need to then retrospectively think about who's the user at the heart of that? Somebody last night was talking to me about how we focus on the outcomes, right? Whilst some people buy a car to own a car, a lot of people buy it to get somewhere, and they get somewhere because that's part of their life. And how are we thinking about the role these things play in people's lives, enabling people to achieve the things they want to achieve?
And coming back to the issue we were talking about of trust, because that will be absolutely key to the delivery of automated vehicles, generally the AI capabilities as well. Do you think there are any particular issues around trust there?
So it was really interesting. We asked that same group of blind and partially sighted people I was talking about earlier, and about a third, different to this room, a third were completely on board. They were like, this is great. Yes, I would trust it. I would get in a vehicle. Another third were very resistant and very, very skeptical to this. But it's interesting because already blind and partially sighted people go on a lot of trust, where you and I might check our surroundings, check where our Uber driver is taking us because we know where we're going in London. If you've got no or low vision, you don't have that option. So a lot of your life is based upon trust. And that does have an impact. It impacts the way in which you end up arriving at a journey. If you miss your train because it's harder to get somewhere, or you can't find the Uber, or you can't find the autonomous vehicle. Thankfully, it sounds like Renee solved that problem for people with sight loss. But if you can't find that, you end up arriving at your job interview, at your medical appointment in a worse way. And I think that's going to really affect trust, because it's going to impact upon people's lives and the outcomes which they have.
Yeah, absolutely. So coming back to Rob on the whole issue of design, what are the design challenges that are being faced for people who are less mobile with the designs of automated vehicles? Again, putting AI into those vehicles, more technology. What design issues arise there?
So I think if we look at what's happening through electrification, you can start to see how you can end up kind of pushing some people to the margins through the advancement in technology. So think about charge points and how accessible they are for different portions of the population. There are lots of charge points, and we need to roll out charge points really quickly, but they are not all accessible to everybody. And so I think there's a need to start to come back and start designing kind of the infrastructure for autonomous vehicles in a way which is going to be inclusive from the outset in order to avoid having some of these challenges. We see the same sort of thing with wheelchair accessible vehicles, where there is a need to heavily modify them in order to make them accessible. But if the floor pan is a battery, then there are some real challenges around doing that conversion. Thinking about that in advance, and it was really great to hear that there are plans for kind of the next generation of vehicles to be fully accessible. I think it's really important, but I think it's also absolutely vital to include all of those communities who would benefit from that accessibility in that design process in order to make it as effective as possible.
And perhaps that's another place for AI exactly in that design process.
Absolutely, and I think, and also, I would say to anyone who is interested in starting to include kind of Motability customers, we run lots of pilots. We have lots of customers who would be really interested in helping to develop that.
Jim, the same issue.
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to echo a lot of what Rob said. A lot of accessibility problems and challenges are kind of solved problems. We know that there are solutions to a lot of them, but when you come to accessibility as a second thought, once you've developed your first prototype, once you've developed your first version, and then you think about how to make it accessible, it's a lot harder. And we find this all of the time. A new technology comes out. I mean, at the moment we're talking about AI, but this has happened, regularly over the last 50 years. New technology comes out. If at the beginning you design in accessibility, it is relatively easy to do. If you try and fix it on the end, it is a lot harder. So I think really nailing accessibility and getting that built in from the beginning, because it can be the difference between a new technology including everybody or actually stretching the gap between the general public and somebody who has a disability. So that's a big thing for us. And I think when we've spoken to blind and partially sighted people, they've talked about kind of 3 areas of concern, one of which is in-vehicle accessibility. So can I control the vehicle? Can I get access to them? If it is just a touch screen and I've got no useful vision, how am I engaging with that touch screen? Is that fully audible communications? And then also, again, thinking back to what Sarah was saying about extreme use cases, a couple of people talked to us about if I'm crossing a road with a guide dog and my mobility cane, am I a regular bit of data that an AI system would understand, right? I will move differently to a sighted person. I will move about, and so how are we predicting how that person will move? And so if those systems aren't trained on that type of data, those extreme use cases, I think that would be a big problem. And then the final one is one which I already mentioned, where we are replacing human drivers, human intervention, really understanding all of the ways in which those people play a role in helping people travel. And the bus driver is a good example of that, but it goes to the same for cab drivers. It is more than just operating a vehicle often. So that's kind of a big point. And I think what we're trying to talk more about and have seen frequently are when you design for these extremes. I think René talked about the iPhone. When from the base you design for some of these extremes, you actually create solutions that work for the mainstream as well, right? So that the iPhone's a great one, you know, usable by somebody who's got no manual dexterity or can't see the screen. But it means that when I'm driving, when I have no manual dexterity, I can't touch it and I can't see it, I can also use it. So those extreme use cases, whilst it may not be obvious immediately, designing for those exceptions actually will add value and quality to the product that you may not realize from the outset of that journey, but we see that time and time again. Thinking about the different ways in which people interact actually enables us to develop better products, better solutions for everybody.
And so it sounds as if we not only need to think about the person, the passenger in the vehicle, but everybody in the surroundings as well as part of that use case.
Absolutely, the whole ecosystem, and that's that point about outcomes, right? Rather than journeys, it's what's the end-to-end journey? What are all of the components that go together to enable somebody to get from A to B?
And Jim, I know that you're really interested in the value of data. So we're talking here about the data that can be used as part of the design process. But there's also the piece around the data that has been recognized for a long time from connected vehicles. How do you see that can be best brought forward to get the most value and to make mobility most available?
Yeah, so I mean, at the moment, what we see from RNIB's perspective is a great big gap because blind and partially sighted people don't use or rely on other people to get about. So at the moment, we see a gap, but we're hoping in the future it can help us to, particularly at a small built environment level, help us understand how to better design the built environment to work for people who've got a variety of different needs to be able to navigate different places. And so fundamentally design some of the infrastructure, the way in which we create the infrastructure, so it works better for everybody.
And I guess that's an ongoing process then, which we're hearing all the time around AI in particular, that it must be tested all the time, it must be developing all the time, we must be learning, it must be learning. So I guess the value of the data comes very much to the forefront there.
Absolutely. And one of the things which we've talked about as well is all of this, all of the way in which AI, automated vehicles, autonomous vehicles are going to work is going to be built around detectors which in some way are taking in some kind of visual information. So there's an interesting thing we're interested in is actually how is the way in which AI sees teaching us about the way in which we see and the way in which we see differently. So there's an interesting bit there about how does it teach us about the way humans see, about the way humans use their vision, and about how AI interprets images. You know, seemingly sometimes completely differently. I'm fascinated by what Sarah was talking about the beginning. You know, how do we get large language, natural language explanations of how a computer sees a picture, and how do we understand that, and what does that teach us about the way in which we design a world that at the moment is fundamentally built around having vision.
Absolutely. So that's probably a good time to come back to Sarah. So what do you think are the key actions required to address the issues we've been talking about and to further build public confidence? Again, we're not just talking about passengers, but the public as a whole.
Oh, it's really hard to come up with kind of the key actions because there's so many things we need to do. Like it's a really, I think that the size of the prize here with autonomy and all of the things we've talked about is so large, but it's such a difficult technology. One, it's a difficult technology to build, and from all of the things just on this panel that we've talked about, there's so many aspects to an end-to-end service that have to be thought about. Like we're the technology developer. We don't even build the vehicles, right? We're really focused on building the AI that powers the self-driving vehicle. So even when we're talking about accessibility and having these, making sure not just the vehicle itself is accessible, but the whole service is accessible. That requires so many different industry actors along the way, and call to arms to vehicle manufacturers. There's a lot of thinking that needs to go into the design of the vehicle itself that we don't even have. We have influence, but we don't make the vehicle. So we really have to think about kind of the end-to-end chain, and that's a really big challenge actually. Probably bigger than actually building the technology itself. And I think government has a really strong role there in providing the incentives to make sure that we don't end up with that really large gap. Because I think it would be really sad to see that happen with autonomy, that it actually made things less equal, because that's one of the most exciting aspects of having this new form of transport. It's not even a new form of transport actually. It's revolutionizing all of the forms of transport that we already have, and we really, really would benefit, particularly in the UK, for different modes of transport, right? In rural areas that don't even have a bus service. Knowing, trains are very expensive now. We need change in the transport network, and it would be such a shame to see that change not serve populations who are underserved currently. So I think it requires a huge amount of communication across all of those groups in the chain, and working with all of the stakeholders who have a real interest in this, and bringing that all together to create an end-to-end service. Like we already do it now, where we're partnering with, for example, retailers. So I think lots of people agree that the big benefits of autonomy are going to be in logistics and last mile delivery. And interestingly, it kind of changes actually depending on which partners you talk to. Some are really driven about for the idea of removing a driver completely. Others not so much. They're actually interested in how you can repurpose that individual. So you might actually still have someone on board, but they're not focused on the driving task. They're able to do other things. They're more so a customer service agent, because delivery partners can really struggle to hire someone who's both a driver and a customer service agent. And, there's notoriously high turnover in those roles. But actually, you can start to think about those roles being completely different and them being much more about serving customers. And, some partners still see a massive business case in reducing insurance premiums, for example, by introducing that increased safety. So you can even think about a world where, we have public transport and buses that is autonomous, but actually maybe you have a conductor on board. And maybe that's something we just decide that has to happen because it has to be accessible. So I guess I haven't really summed up the key actions, other than we all just need to keep talking about this, and hopefully we can, convene groups all along that kind of end-to-end service to make sure that we don't end up with a more kind of inaccessible and unequal transport
that sounds
network.
Like a clear message. Coming back to you, Kevin, quick thought on what you've heard and one action that you see should be taken soon.
Just one. I'll try and be quick. I raised a number of barriers, didn't I? And I'd be remiss if I didn't say ways of overcoming those. So I think that the logistics industry can't really afford to fund this until we get to the end state of full autonomy. So there needs to be lots of collaboration between technology companies, manufacturers, and industry. But perhaps the role of the logistics company is not to find the capital investment whilst we go through those different phases. It's actually to provide the time and the materials and the know-how and the test bed for running those live tests. I think collaboration on legislation, I think the automated vehicles bill, autonomous vehicles bill is in the right direction. It's flexible. It can let technology, as technology changes, then so can the law quite quickly and flexibly. I think that's important. We need to think about things like investing in the infrastructure, actually, the street infrastructure, and lots of challenge, like with traffic lights and road signs, and where you get gaps in data and GPS and mobile signals. How do we manage that? Local authorities and national bodies paint lines on the road. That all needs to be done effectively and funded effectively, as do potholes, and making sure that we have live data on you know, where accidents are, where diversions are, where roadworks are. That's a bit of a mess at the moment, isn't it? It's certainly not live and consistent on GPS and things that guide automated vehicles. And coming back to public perception, I think in terms of commercial sector embracing autonomous vehicles, I think we're ready to wait until people are ready to see a large vehicle going up and down a motorway without a driver. And I think that will come as consumers get used to taxis and buses and their own vehicles that don't require drivers.
Jim, quick thought from you?
I think probably is involve people, you know, and get them at the heart of what you're doing and how you're designing. You know, both Motability and RNIB have got access to a large group of people who would be more than willing to help come to talk to you about what their experience is and have them at the heart of creating this solution. Now's the time to get that accessibility design in now, not tomorrow. And if you get it right now, it will it will just transform, you know, millions of people's lives, way more than the 2 million I represent, the 16 million Rob represents. It will have an impact, a massive impact.
Rob, very quick.
Very quickly, I'll just say connected data today is eye-wateringly expensive, and to really offer innovative solutions to wide numbers of niches, it can't remain that way. We have to find a way to open up the innovative ecosystem around that connected data in a way that's going to deliver the right services for the whole country.
Thank you. I think we've got time probably for just one question from the audience. Who's going to be first hand up? We've got one here. Have we got the microphone? Thank you very much. And for everybody else, the panel are very kindly staying for lunch, so they're available to ask your questions then.
Thank you. Florencio Cuervo, Leve Mobility. I heard and read on the news that there is a trend for safety to go back to the knobs as controls in replacement of touch screens which had been deployed extensively in the car manufacturing. I see that for the case of accessibility, gesture, the use of gesture instead of knobs could be the opportunity to make the vehicles more accessible, but I'm not sure if the AI embedded in the ECUs for cars could currently accept, or this is something that you will support, or you think is advisable to go, instead to go back to knobs, to go to gesture for accessibility.
Rob?
I think having voice assistants in cars will be a huge kind of benefit for lots of people. Even you know, fully able-bodied drivers, I think, would benefit substantially. I had a vehicle where the windscreen wiper controls were kind of 3 layers down on a touch screen that's over here, and that has gone back to being on a little stalk on my current car. It would be much easier if I could control it with my voice, and I think that that's a very accessible solution for many people.
I think my last role is to bring it to a close and to thank the panel. Absolutely fascinating ideas there, and hopefully ideas for people in the audience. So in the usual way, if we could thank the panel.